Welcome to the Rival Reds. We're here at the Place in Leeds and we're drinking a pint of Tuneborg. Cheers, Mike.
Cheers, Rick. We're here today to talk about football. So we talk today about the World Cup final. What bigger occasion is there to talk about? 32 teams entered when we started this little expedition last month, and now there are only two remaining, France and Croatia. World Cup final, the biggest match in football. Who's going to win?
France.
Well, that's all we need. Thank you very much for listening to this one. See you next time. I think that's not a very original opinion. I think most people would agree that France start as strong favourites. Do
you disagree?
No, I would agree that France would certainly be favourites. In fact, when I was watching the England game, as well as thinking, why the hell can't we score and why the hell do we keep putting it long, part of my soul, or my unconscious being, was thinking, I'm glad we're not about to get embarrassed by France in the final. We've got the easier side of the draw again. We've got Belgium's reserves. We've made the right path here. But yeah, I think France are the best team on paper out of any who started this tournament and are comfortably better than Croatia.
John, when we reviewed the semi-finals, though, I genuinely believe and still believe that the easier route for us or the easier game for us would have been France, because I think they would have underestimated us. But it's off the table. Maybe the argument for Croatia potentially winning this game is that France will underestimate them.
I think so. I think that Croatia, as we saw from the game against England, they felt slighted that England weren't taking them as seriously as they felt that they ought to have been taken. They felt like they deserved far more respect and arguably to go into that game as favourites. If you have that feeling against England, maybe that'll be magnified against France, who are, by most people's eyes, a superior team.
But so I made that comment based on a certain feeling about French arrogance, about how good their team was. But I recently read an article on France's endeavours in the Euros, and when they beat Germany in the semi-finals, they thought they'd won it.
Yeah,
they thought they had won it. They thought it was done and dusted. They thought they didn't need to do any more. And then they came up against what most people thought a poor Portugal side, and were shocked. They were really shocked by. They went into it so complacent. I think is the way it went, and maybe they're going to be a bit more guarded against that because of the experience they've had.
I'd certainly agree with that. I think that they have, by their own admission, hugely underestimated that Portugal side and assumed that they'd won the cup and believed their own hype. And they've made no secret of mentioning that, and also at pains to point out that hasn't happened and the difference in approach this time round. So they will be doing everything to guard against that. However, it's easy to say those things and to make the right noises. It's another thing to actually implement it. It is, in a way, eerily similar, their route to the final, playing a much stronger team and arguably a semi-final that most people said this should be the final, and then moving on to a supposed lesser fancy team in the final. The parallels are pretty similar, and no matter how much you guard against it, that may still be a risk that they do just underestimate what is a team of a lot of talent, and that, if underestimated, will absolutely prove you wrong and capable of an upset.
If there's one thing that history tells us, it's that anything can happen in one game.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you know, somebody could get sent off in the first minute for France. The ref could be dead set against them.
Yeah.
Anything could happen. Really could be absolutely anything. But I think we're both agreed, if quality wins out, then France will probably see this out. And I don't think they've been by any stretch of the imagination the team of the tournament.
Really? Would you say they haven't been the best team in the tournament so far?
Yeah, I would say that. I don't think I've seen them blow any team away. I don't think I've seen them. I don't even think that I've seen them fully stretched. I feel like they've been within their comfort zone throughout the tournament.
Isn't that even more impressive, though, given that they had the hard side of the draw, given that they've had to go through Argentina, through Belgium, through a relatively
they've
tough
done
group,
it without really stretching their legs. And that's why I do think they'll come away with this. I don't think they've not. The thing is, they've not made as much as they haven't got out of. It's almost complacency that's their laissez-faire attitude that stopped them getting out of second gear.
If only the French had a word for that.
I think they have just really comfortably just got by everybody. I mean, it probably hasn't looked comfortable. There's certainly games that they've played where I've thought, geez, you were lucky to win that. But maybe that's not lucky. Maybe that's just their quality shining through. And actually, it's an underestimation on our part of just how good they are.
I think that's happened. I think the first game aside, when they played Australia, and they were woeful in that game. They were really, really average, and they hadn't clicked. After that, they bought.
Which they won.
Which exactly they ended up winning. After that game, did they win or did they draw? I think it was a 1-1 draw because Australia got a penalty from VAR. We're racking our brains here, but yes, they were poor in that game, and I think they were correctly pilloried for that. After that game, we saw them change their system. They brought in Giroud up front, and I think ever since then they have really looked like a unit that has been able to win without really getting into fifth gear.
The irony of that being that Giroud's probably been the weakest point since he's come into the side.
Yeah, I think so. He's not a world-class striker by any means.
I think what he does is occupy lots and lots of players to free up the better players.
Exactly. With him playing, I think that Mbappe is no longer the absolute focal point. He can maraud from either flank and has the freedom to run up defenders and get them turned to him back to goal.
He's been bloody good, hasn't he?
He's a phenomenal player. A lot's been made on the passing of the mantle from Ronaldo and from Messi to the next generation, of which Mbappe is leading the charge. Do you agree? Do you think he's the next GOAT, as the children say these days?
I mean, they really, really, really have talked him up, and I don't know if that's the case. Every time I watch him, I love watching him. I love what he does and what he's capable of. But I don't know if I see him at Messi and Ronaldo's level. I mean, what they've done, the sheer number of goals that they've scored over the last 10 years is mind-blowing. And I think that's going to be really difficult to cope with. I think it's similar to the situation we see with tennis, in that there's no young next great talent coming through, and we've seen it actually rather than a bunch of new young guys coming through and taking the mantle from Federer and Nadal, Djokovic, we've actually seen a resurgence in those guys, and we see Federer's 36, I think he is. Nadal 32, I think, and Djokovic in his 30s.
So they are doing a Ronaldo almost in refining their game in the later years and showing that they were something special to begin with. That that's a once in a generation player rather than a normal assembly line talent.
Yeah, and I think it's incredible that we've been able to see Ronaldo and Messi being at the height of their game at the same time.
Yeah, very rare.
And perhaps we won't ever see their likes again. I mean, that's a stretch, But
I agree, because even though that may be a stretch, it's certainly even more of a stretch to think that the next one is rolling off the production line and will just take their place.
Ready to go, yeah.
I mean, they changed football when they came on the scene, and they were wide players who were scoring more than strikers did. And to his credit, I mean, it must be said that Mbappe himself has absolutely laughed off the comparisons between him and anybody else, even the comparisons between him and
He's
Ronaldo,
going to, though, isn't he? Because he doesn't want the pressure of thinking of, as soon as those guys retire, thinking, right, I've got to do it every week now, or the media are going to be on me saying, why isn't Mbappe doing it? Yeah, he's the next great thing.
Yeah,
the pressure would just be unbelievable on whoever, anyone that spotlight falls on. It's going to be unbelievable pressure. I almost hope, as a Liverpool fan, I almost hope that Salah doesn't win the Ballon d'Or, because if he does, the pressure's just going to be ridiculous on him next year. And I prefer him. He's never going to go on the under the radar again because of his performances last year. But I'd almost prefer that he didn't win it, so that pressure is on him to perform at that level.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I mean, Mbappe's dealt with it well, and I think a lot of the stories that are coming out show what a down-to-earth guy he is, and show how well he's handling it. I don't know if it's him or his social media team, but seems to be doing a fantastic job at really just keeping his feet on the ground, and given that he's such a young player and is really the standout player at this tournament, the amount of grounding that he shows is pretty damn impressive. So moving on to the game itself, what do you see being the key area of the battle? I mean, we saw against England that although he didn't have the best game of his life, Modric and the quality that he and Rakitic with that Croatian midfield and the defensive midfield behind them, that it can really dominate a game. Do you think that Kante will be the answer to that? Do you think France's midfield is set up better than England's to deal with that?
Yeah, I think in the England game we saw that we actually chose to bypass our midfield. We just didn't trust our midfield against them at all. And I don't think that's going to be the case with France. I think that little bit of arrogance that we talked about earlier means that they trust themselves implicitly. Why wouldn't you with players like Pogba and Kante? Why wouldn't you trust yourself against absolutely everybody? Surely they've got to back themselves. I mean, that's part of why they lost the game against Portugal. But at the same time, that's why they should have no fear going into this game. They should be able to say, we'll play for anyone. We will play for anyone, but they have to play. They can't go into it and think that it's just going to happen for them and they're going to win it anyway. Mm-hmm. They have to turn up and play, and they're big players like Griezmann really have to do a job.
I agree, and I think I would categorise this World Cup from France as a World Cup of a changing narrative. So from the first game when they were pilloried against Australia, since then there's almost been a change of opinions from Deschamps as this clueless player who's got an absolute wealth of talent at his disposal who doesn't know how to utilise it, to a perhaps more accurate portrayal of him as quite an astute tactician and admittedly a defensive coach, but nobody's fool. And I think a player that you could say that of is arguably Pogba, who in the first game or the second game he was perhaps being written about negatively for not scoring a screamer or not dominating a game. But now he's winning plaudits at a more reserved role and as a more less the focal point of the team, but a disciplined and a more defensive performance. As a Liverpool fan, I'm sure there's no love lost there. But what do you see as Pogba's performances in this World Cup?
Yeah, he's a really, really interesting player. He's clearly incredibly gifted, and I just wonder if we've expected too much of Pogba ever since his big money move to United. We all expected him to be a Messi or Ronaldo, given how much he moved for, when actually he's more of a midfield support to what's going on in the rest of the team rather than the focal point. He's certainly not a Griezmann, is he?
No, exactly, and I think it's one rumour that we can dispel, that it's easy to see him for France and see him putting in good performances, and to make the, in my opinion, lazy comparison of, it's Mourinho who's shackling him, and he's allowed to be his free, true self for France. He plays a more reserved role for France and a more disciplined role for France than he does for Man United. And he's got less of the creative impetus for France than he does for United, where he's had to do everything.
That also counters the argument that he's not capable of playing a more disciplined role.
Exactly. So I think the truth is more
somewhere in between.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not that he's shackled at United. It's not that he's asked to do too much defensive work, and that if you take the shackles off him, he will be the best player in the world. It is more that he is asked to do too much, if anything. He's asked to do everything. He's asked to run the show in midfield and be the creative focus, where in France, he knows that he has to do the absolute defensive work, Kante aside him, and he has Griezmann above him to be a creative thrust. And the pressure isn't solely on him to defend, create and score.
This has just occurred to me. Might be painful to hear as a United fan, but perhaps he just has more trust in the players around him when he's playing for France than he does for United. You know, maybe he's thinking maybe it is just too much pressure at United because you don't have the quality that France do.
I think that's true. I think he came back to United as the prodigal son returning, and for France, whether it's the increased quality or something else that's making him feel that sort of freedom in the shirt, but he looks like a player who's more comfortable in himself when he plays for France. And last season, when we signed Matic, we thought this would be the true Pogba unleashed to go forward. Whereas I think the truth is more, as you say, with quality players around him, he is able to look like an absolute world beater and has the defensive discipline and the ability and the physical attributes to be the first name on anybody's team sheet. Without that, you can't ask him to do everything because he's a young guy and he's not that player. He's not a striker that can bag you 20 goals. But for France, we see a far more accomplished and limited Pogba, I feel.
And maybe he is and just will be always a little bit inconsistent because, or maybe you say mercurial because at times he looked, certainly last season for United, he looked like he was the best player in the league.
Yeah, he's got that talent, yes.
He looked, in certain games, he looked like he was just unstoppable. And, as a Liverpool fan watching him, I was thinking, Jesus Christ, I hope this guy doesn't hit a run of form because if he does, it doesn't bear to think about if he just continues to play like that. But luckily that never happened. And he had an equal amount of games where he was totally anonymous and could have been subbed in the first 10 minutes because it was one. I feel like
sometimes he was subbed in the first. First half.
I feel like with him, you kind of really get the sense very early on in the game of whether he's on it or not.
Yeah,
he's not the kind of player that like Stan Collymore. He could be anonymous for 70 minutes and pop up with an absolutely stunning goal at any point. He kind of went under the radar. But I feel like if Pogba's having a good game, you know it from the first minute.
I think you're right, and it will be interesting to see how he starts the game against Croatia, and crucially whether that Pogba, Matuidi and Kante central midfielder three can provide an effective shield to what you would imagine is Croatia's best weapon, their ability to control the game. They're certainly more physically opposing than England. They're certainly more creative and harder working than England's midfields. And I agree with you that I think they are better equipped to deal with that Croatian strength.
Do you think it's just about the midfields?
I think that'll be where it's won and lost. I think you saw against England that once Croatia can take control of the game to the point where their opposition just needs to bypass and hit hopeful balls down the flank or balls into a striker, it can effectively be like a python grip of strangling the life out of a team until they either just run themselves to oblivion or in frustration make more and more mistakes.
I think what we kind of had though is two strong defenses, two creative midfields and two very poor attacks.
With Mbappe aside, obviously.
I'd count him as a midfielder rather than a striker. I think although he joins the attack, he's just as Salah is a midfielder on your fantasy league, I'd count Mbappe.
Yeah, I can see that. He's certainly drifting from wide, and will look to be more of a wide forward than a centre forward. And then yes, I think that in Giroud and the Croatian striker, it's not the most mobile of front twos, and it's not a centre forward combination that you'd be much in fear of. So saying that, two tight defences, would you say that the Croatian creativity in midfield will stand a chance? Because the way I see it is a Croatian creative midfield, but a French stifling and disciplined midfield and high work rate.
It might be a case of whoever has the better day. It might be if you get the likes of Pogba turning up and feeling good, and Mbappe and Griezmann feeling on it, then they just run the show. They run the show and overrun them. On the other side of that, it might be a case of Perisic and Modric and Rakitic all doing the same. If they have a great day, then maybe France can't cope with them. In the England game with Croatia, I think we saw a case where almost everybody looked off form. Mandzukic did brilliantly to put that goal away at in extra time, but I think really nobody really kind of stood up and did fantastically well for the entire game. I think our defence were very, very good for long periods of the game. Stones and Walker were great for a lot of that game, but they tired towards the end, and I think that was the case for everybody really. They had their good and bad points throughout the game. It wasn't a case like anybody was outstanding.
I agree. I think we can see if Croatia are going to win, rather than it being on the technical strength of their team, which, although impressive, is a bit short of France's, it will be on that collective team ability to slog it out and to endure and survive. I think that's been tested against England in although it wasn't a dirty match, it was an absolute battle, and it was an absolute mire that they had to run through to get the victory. And in a way that perhaps France's team hasn't quite been tested like that. They've always looked within themselves, and they've never really been.
Is it going to be the same narrative as the England game? Is everybody going to think, well, now Croatia have been through 3 lots of extra time,
they must be tired.
France, exactly. And France are fresh as daisies. They've only just turned up to the tournament. Mm-hmm. Is that going to be the same narrative? And then are we all going to be surprised by Croatia's ability to come through adversity?
I think so, and I think if Croatia win, that will be how they do it. But unlike England, France have quality in every single area of the pitch, and as we've seen from France, even when they're not playing well, whether you put that down to being in 4th gear or 3rd gear and not having to play well, or just not clicking as a team, they can still cut you open in a second. And I can't see how Croatia, with all the will in the world, will keep that France creativity quiet. Yeah.
Okay,
France have to score.
Remind me, what was your prediction for the scoreline?
I am going for a 2-0 win for France here. I think it will be relatively comfortable.
I'm saying 2-1 win for France. I think I certainly hope it's an entertaining game, because it would just be a wasted 90 minutes if not.
Certainly so. I mean, it could arguably be that anyway with England out now. I mean, it's.
And let me ask you quickly, who will you be supporting?
I'll be supporting France, simply because there is a Manchester United player playing for them. I would love Pogba to be a World Cup winner, to return to this Man United squad, buoyed by the fact that he's won the World Cup with a World Cup winners' medal.
I'll be supporting Croatia, partly because Lovren's playing for them, but also because I'd like to think that if England did get knocked out, they got knocked out by the best in the tournament.
Moral victor, I think that's something that comes comfortably to you as a Liverpool fan. If the goalposts weren't there, then Liverpool would have won 4 titles since the Premier League.
I also, while you're just chatting shit there, I would also like to see a new winner of the
very true,
the cup.
And I don't think we can say enough what an achievement it is, even getting to the final for a nation of Croatia's size and such a new nation as well. Yeah, they've done fantastically to get there, and if they can win it, it will be an achievement rivaled by pretty much none other in sport. You talk about Leicester winning the league, but I mean, at this stage in the World Cup final, for a small nation to win it like that, it
didn't even exist 30 years ago.
Exactly. Unbelievable, Jeff. And on that note, we've been supping our fine Danish lager. What have you made of your pint of Tuborg?
I've not been overly keen, I'm not going to lie.
Okay.
A bit acidic for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's a bit of the lesser fancied of the two famous Danish lagers, with Carlsberg being probably a superior choice. But Tuborg being the hipster choice. And on that note, we hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and we'll see you again soon for another pint.
Cheers, guys.
Ta-ra.